And we'll finish up our second of two shows this week with a listener question. Comes from Elliot, who says, with the World Championship coming up and Sky testing out some new features / camera angles, what one addition would you make to their coverage if you could? Personally, I'd love to see more in-studio guests like in other sports, but maybe there isn't time in the broadcast. You can also maybe make a change to an existing feature. It doesn't have to be a new concept.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I've had a thought, and I didn't come up with anything off the top of my head. One big thing I would have said 6 months ago was add Dan Dawson, and they only went and done that. We do see at the World Championships, they usually tend to add more features. The two that pop to mind is the best fancy dress at each session and the best things written on the 180 cards. And maybe there's a couple other things they've done before. And it does add a little bit. It's just a goofy little thing when they come back from an advert break to show what's going on in the crowd. But beyond that, I don't know what needs to be added. I mean, their coverage, especially in the last couple of years, has improved significantly. Part of that is that the overall caliber of the commentary team has gotten better. Obviously, they've had Rod Studd, Wayne Martle, and John Part for a long time, and those three have all been fantastic. But adding in Mark Webster, adding in Dan Dawson, now, Corian Hammond's been getting involved recently as well. We've seen, and Laura Turner, we've seen just an overall increase in the caliber of the commentary team and less having to utilize people who may be very good commentators but don't follow darts. That darts isn't their main sport, and they just sort of thrown in because there's so many matches. And that makes a difference. It makes just the overall experience so much better when you have people that know what's going on day in, day out on the tour. Obviously, current and former players are going to know what's going in, day out on the tour because they are going to follow it. But, that's something that people might overlook about Rod Studd is that Studd follows the darts. And I think that the fact that there's more commentators who really do know what's going on at the Pro Tours and the Euro Tours has made a big difference. I don't know what I would add. I like the suggestion. I think this is a really good question. It's something that I think I'm sure they're always brainstorming, and I'd love to hear what our listeners have to say. But I think Sky's coverage has really improved significantly over the last couple of years, and there's nothing that immediately comes to mind that I think they should add or do that much differently to make the coverage any better. I think they've been doing a very good job, and they should be applauded for the quality of their coverage the last couple of years.
I've got to agree with that, and I think probably Sky at the moment, I know there's not many broadcasters based in the UK that are showing darts at the moment, but I'll probably say Sky are the ones that are leading the game at the moment. And you mentioned Dan Dawson there, who had that. We had him on the show quite recently, and we spoke to him about his call up to Sky this year as part of their broadcast, and he mentioned that there's not a lot of time in the broadcast to do loads of different things when you compare it to a sport like football. And he mentioned this, you've got a lot of time for build up and a lot of time for analysis afterwards. It's one game you're looking back on, whereas with the darts you can often have 8 games during a session, or if it's a World Cup and you've got multiple games during that session, then it's a lot more, and it is pretty much bang bang on to the next game. But one of the things that I mentioned, this is one of the questions that we had a couple of weeks ago, and I did reply to it on Twitter as well, and I said, for me, one of the big things I'd like to see is Sky maybe utilise their digital platforms, social media a bit. And okay, I guess this is a little bit away from the broadcast, but for me, I think the big tournaments, talking the World Championships, the World Match Plays, I think every player that wins a game on that stage should get an interview from the broadcaster. And I know due to time constraints that maybe sometimes can't be done on the broadcast, but still get them for an interview with the reporter. They usually have a reporter there for every session doing interviews with the bigger names. Get them involved, chatting to the other players that win, and you can post them out on social media, maybe play them in other places as well, like the website as well. And it's getting the players out there, getting their personalities out there, I think is a big thing for me. And I remember I don't know why it came to me. I know he's your favourite player, but Mark Walsh, I remember he won a game at a World Championship. This is going back a few years now, but he had an interview with Sky, and I think the interview was taking place while the next game was going ahead, so you could just hear the interview. And I think Mark signed off by saying, yeah, I'll speak to you again in another 3 years or something like that. It was a comment like that, but you see players often, you don't hear from them on the Sky broadcast, but they're players that are regularly winning games in those Sky events. So for me, I think I'd like to see that would be a feature that I'd bring in, and maybe going back to the old days of the players in the studio afterwards, 5-6 minute interviews, probably something we won't see again. But I used to look forward to that. As when I first started watching darts on Sky, you'd have your Phil Taylors, your Raymond van Barnevelds, Colin Lloyds, Kevin Painters. They'd be up on that stage for an hour, and then they'd go to in studio with Dave Clark for 5 or 6 minutes chatting to him, and you'd get a really good insight from Dave and the players back then. But yeah, again, maybe it is a timing issue, but if we can't have that, let's get all the players interviewed and maybe develop the digital platforms and again get the characters of the players out there a little bit more.